discussing two events. Both are papers. Actually, no, one is a presentation, the other is a paper. I want to start with the paper. It's a follow-up paper on the success of the fusion reactor experiment, which was going on in Livermore, and I think it's beautiful to kind of pick that out because look, fusion could potentially be a savior for humanity, but it's a very we're in very early days, and I've written a blog post about this about a year ago, that I'm kind of against fusion reaction as a solution for energy, just because we have a problem here of very little iteration and a very high cost, and that those types of, it's usually not a good it's not a good pathway for innovation. Nevertheless, I want to discuss this paper because it's a follow-up paper. So in December 2022, Lawrence Livermore National Lab announced that fusion reaction had produced more energy than it was required to kickstart it, and that was sort of the beginning of potentially fusion being a solution. But fundamentally, I still think it's a tricky path at best. Maybe it's even a fusion is illusion type of thing. So I'm going to discuss that a little bit more. The second paper is Tree Dao. I think I've discussed Tree's contributions to flash attention already in the NeurIPS conversation, but my point here is, again, I just want to reiterate how innovation in AI can happen on every level of the stack. And this is a very good example where re-architecting transformer architecture with hardware in mind is really, adding, according to Tree, about 6x faster clock wall speed, which is pretty good. Just for, think about it. You're not changing any hardware, you're just changing an algorithm, and you're getting 6x speed. You're getting also probably a good thermal budget. This is really an interesting situation, this flash attention, which came out of the electrical engineering cluster at Stanford. And I want to discuss that a little further. This is not even a podcast. It's February 8, 2024. This is Crim Telco. For the day, the fund is up roughly 50 basis points. The market's still open. The market is down 20 basis points. For the year, we are down 18.5%. The market is up 3.5%, where we're underperforming by roughly 22%. Again, the market's still open. These things could change. So let's start with the fusion reaction. This is an article that is written about a paper that came out. So the paper is basically confirming what the fusion people said they did. So the groundbreaking result was achieved at California's Lab National Ignition Facility, NIF, which used an array of 192 high-power lasers to blast tiny pellets of deuterium and tritium fuel in a process known as internal confinement fusion. So think about it this way. You're using a laser that shoots on a small pellet. The pellet contains some form of hydrogen. You kind of break that apart. The hydrogen then gets energized by this laser, hitting the pellet. And what you're trying to achieve is the hydrogen fusing into helium, which is what's happening in the sun. And what they showed a year ago, about a year and a half ago, and now this new paper is positive, which was published in Physical Review letters, confirms that at least the experiment as it was done makes sense. It's a good experiment. It holds up, and therefore it showed that there's nothing fundamentally limiting us from being able to harness fusion in the lab. That's what comes from Annie Krichter. I'm probably butchering her name. She's the physicist running this particular experiment. So is this a breakthrough or not? Technically it is, because we get more energy out than we need. However, let's talk about some of the problems. I think there's two fundamental problems in this. One is when you attack these pellets, when you're trying to, shine energy onto these pellets which contain the fuel, you need perfect symmetry, which is really very difficult to achieve. So this is one thing that my feeling here is that we could actually use some computational physics or chemistry to achieve that. Second, we need better laser technology. And this is already one of the biggest caveats here, that we might say, well, laser X used, let's say, 100 units of energy and produced 110 units of energy to fusion. But we're not saying how much energy went into the laser itself. And the lasers are usually very inefficient. And on top of that, we need better performance of lasers. So this whole idea of fusion reaction really hinges on better laser technology, and it also hinges on like I said, better palette technology, and there's a couple of other things, but fundamentally what we need is more innovation in laser technology and more innovation in achieving perfect symmetries. I think this reminds me of my discussion about the SynFuel Symposium, right? Because it's kind of similar. Of course, it's a very different problem. Maybe the overarching connection here is that we're trying to get alternative feedstocks from here it's hydrogen, over there it's methane feedstocks coming from biomass. But the problem is solved through engineering. The problem is solved through tinkering, iteration, through and potentially it could be solved in silico. And that this brings me back to my talk yesterday that I spoke about Jensen Huang talking about in silico design for drug. Well, why not in silico design for this type of problem? So there's really a lot of upside, I think, for us using technology, computational technology. I don't even want to call it AI. I think AI is an overused word right now. Let's call it computational methods. We need perfect symmetry. Well, let's use computational methods. We need better lasers. Let's use computational methods. I don't know where the science stands on this front. I know that physics, particle physics, and this lab, these Livermore lab people, actually they're pretty involved in computational methods, and sometimes they're using computational methods for very different reasons, and they could actually be using better computational methods for solving some of those fusion problems. I mean, it's not inconceivable to think about that. So again, very exciting. I personally am against fusion just because it's a very high cost of error, high cost of error correction type endeavor. I'm more interested in lower lower cost, higher iteration, bottom up type stuff that doesn't require billions of government funding. Also, let's assume we get an energy source through fusion. How is that going to pan out in terms of just political issues and stuff like that? So I'm a bit skeptical on that. But again, I think as a science project and as a discussion point for what you're actually trying to achieve as humanity, how are we going to get to better energy harvesting, right? I mean, let's think about this more fundamentally, right? We have a problem, which is we need energy. We can't, this idea that we, use less and sort of fall into a Malthusian world, that's not going to happen. So what we need is more energy, and we can think about it in many different ways, right? We can have bottom-up distributed solar, which is quite frankly problematic at least. Maybe that's even a mild word to say. Simply, we're not getting enough traction there, and we need the grid as a balancer. We have low balancing problems. So nuclear is a problem. Fossil fuels are a problem. So all energy sources are a problem. So how can we get better alternative energy? And currently, our best guess, our best solution is still solar and intermediate solutions through batteries. Whether it's scalable or not, I mean, Tesla on the battery, they showed the path towards decarbonizing energy with about $10 trillion investment. So it's doable. Whether these numbers are achievable, that's another question. But I think if we put ourselves into the focus of the good thing about solar and batteries is that it's bottom up. And I just spoke about with one of my friends who works on sustainable energy in Germany, and I think everybody agrees. I mean, people have different opinions about whether it should be Tesla doing it, whether it should be large utilities doing it. People have different opinions about incumbents trying to block innovation. And there's a lot of political resistance. There's people protecting their turf, but fundamentally, in principle, I think the bottom-up approach is still better. I think the second event I want to discuss today is a very different event, and it's about flash attention. I spoke about this already in the NeurIPS conversation. I just want to revisit it. Tri Dao gave recently a talk at Stanford. I didn't attend it physically, but I did attend it online, and I think it's a beautiful example of how ideas can have real physical impact. So flash attention. The idea of flash attention is the following. So you have you're looking at AI training and inference, which today is more or less, no matter where you look and no matter how you look, you're going to encounter some sort of transformer architecture, which has certain mathematical operations. In a nutshell, it's a query times a key, which gives you a matrix that you softmax. So you give a probability matrix, and then you multiply that by value, and then you get your expected. You sort of think of it like a maximum likelihood approximation of potentialities, and that's how transformers are able to predict the next word or the next sequence or the next picture or pixel or whatever it may be. It's all about probability distributions and either a maximum likelihood type estimation or something similar, where you're trying to say, okay, this data point most likely belongs to this type of distribution, and the probability that it should be here versus there is higher, so let me put it there. That kind of thing requires a lot of matrix multiplication. And I think the biggest innovation of flash attention, and the people on flash attention, and Tri talks about this, is that they thought about the problem okay, what is the actual problem? Is it should we reduce floating point operations, which is how most endeavors actually work, because compute is it's all about compute. So if we can reduce the compute, we can actually have a better wall clock time, a better thermal budget. And it turns out, no, that's not the case. The wall clock time is not driven by compute. It's actually driven by memory read and write. This is, of course, has honor mutlu written all over it. It's about in the context of GPUs, we're talking about SRAM versus high bandwidth memory. And the goal of flash attention is to do as much computation as possible in SRAM, and then just the final product sort of gets moved into high bandwidth memory versus doing it all the time, doing it back and forth. This is the biggest innovation. This is the way the solution is what they call tiling. Think of it like you're doing most of the computation in SRAM by sort of splicing the computational load up, and then you're using some mathematical tricks called rescaling, because some of the matrix multiplications, they actually require that everything is done in one shot, and this is why you have a lot of read and writes into HBM. It's because you have to do it in one shot, so you do it here and then move it there, move it here, move it there. What if you could do, let's say 3-4 tiles in SRAM, and then move them to HBM, and then do a computation, combine them in one shot? You could do that. There's mathematical tricks that can allow that to happen, and you're not even losing a lot of information here. So the concept is sort of the intuition here is that you're kind of approximating. You have, let's say you have a row of numbers, and then you splice that into 4 pieces, and you're kind of approximating each row, the connection between one and the others, and therefore you're not losing too much information when you're separately computing them and then combining them. This is really, I'm giving here an intuition. The mathematics is a lot more involved, and this podcast is not the kind of venue where we should be discussing this in detail. Please go check the papers. There's some very pivotal papers out there, flash attention, that explain all the math. But I think for me here, talking about what's the purpose of Orange Capital Partners is to generate wealth by investing in fundamentally new concepts, engineering practices, and what is the purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense of what it feels like to run a hedge fund. So we're not in the business of explaining math, but what I think what we can do here is really, sort of move the attention of our listeners towards these types of examples where ideas or approaches and basically fundamentally problem solving. Okay, this is about problem solving. Sometimes problem solving involves billions of dollars of investment, and sometimes it involves just an idea. And this is the beauty about this. And I think this is what we're trying to achieve with this particular episode here. Just point out two interesting ideas. One is, fusion reaction, talk about some of the recent news, and the other is flash attention. Again, it's just an idea, it's being implemented, it's very successful, and it's actually enabling a massive acceleration of generative AI, which is based on transformer technology. Thank you.